Welcome to the Coast to Coast podcast, brought to you by Play Picks and The Lines, coming to you from the West Coast. Josh Lander, joined by my guy Nate Weitzer on the East Coast. And it's time for the play-in games, not quite yet the playoff games, as these are not considered the playoffs. But we are going to be looking at the first couple of games here, one in the West, one in the East, taking a look at some of the best bets in here. We've got some player props. We've got a lot of stuff we're going to be bringing you all playoffs long as we continue on in this NBA season. Nate does have a great article up on playpicks.com with some best bets and player props in there. And make sure you are liked and subscribed to that page. As I mentioned, we'll continue to have all of every single playoff game in a video for each of those up for you guys as we roll through the playoffs, including these play-in games. So you're going to want to check out all of those. And we're going to continue on with the player props as well, as we do feel like there's plenty of value to be had, especially as you know, guys are going to be trying their best, right? Every single night, really nobody taking any time off unless, of course, knock on wood, there are injuries. But we'll be looking to continue all of these things with you guys here. And also just want to make sure you guys know to head to thelines.com. We've got our props tool and our player props tool, as well as our odds tool on there. So you can make sure you're getting the best bets from all the juice that is available out there for you from odds makers. And as always, if you do still need a FanDuel or a DraftKings account, head to ftpicks.com or dkpicks.com and find those listings in your area, such as the couple games we're going to run through today. Nate.
Yeah, Tuesday night, here we go. Play-in games. The Nets are minus 8.5 right now with a total of 228.5. Haven't seen much movement with Jared Allen officially ruled out with that finger. He was going to try to give it a go, but he's not going to be available for the Cavs. Evan Mobley did come back a couple games ago, so they have him, but they're still pretty much reeling along that front court. And then the other game is Clippers +3 at Minnesota, and that total is at 230.5. We will break that game down for you in full in a separate episode. Looking at Cavs Nets, though, and the Nets, after winning 4 straight to get home court in this game, including an 11-point win over the Cavs, sitting pretty. I mean, I don't think there's many scenarios where they're not going to win this game. There is a lot of evidence to say that they are unlikely to cover, mainly the fact that they've just struggled their way through the regular season and been worse at home and well below expectations with that ridiculous 5-26 record against the spread as a home favorite. They are 17-15 straight up in those games, though. And I mean, there's obviously been a whole soap opera and a roller coaster of a season for them to put them in those positions where they have gone below expectations. At this point, it's kind of similar to the Nets team we saw Kevin Durant just put on his back against the Bucks and laid against the Celtics last playoffs, in my opinion. I mean, Kyrie is out there versus last time it was James Harden on one leg. But it is really Kevin Durant and just a bunch of guys who do different whirling dervish things. Think Bruce Brown, Andre Drummond. It's just non-scorers, and it's really a high usage rate for KD. Can you stop the best player in the world? No, probably not. But it does impact the pace of play. You look at how they've finished those last 8 games in the playoffs last season, 6-1-1 to the under, allowing just 103 points per game, scoring just 107 with a 95 pace. And I think we're going to see now that it's playoff time, not that they've been crushing overs at all, but I think the pace is going to slow even more. You look at the Nets at home since the start of March, 96.8 pace versus about 100 on the road. They've gone under in 6 of their last 8, and the only overs against the Pistons and Pacers, tanking teams that don't really play a lick of defense right now. The Cavs are 28th in pace since the All-Star break, 25th on the season, and they've tried to slow it down, especially when they know when they're underdogs like this. I mean, we talked about it all the time in the last half of the season. When they're road favorites, you want to hit that over. When they're home underdogs or just underdogs in general, smack the under, and they will slow the pace to try to stay in this game. As they did against Brooklyn the last time these teams met, the pace was 89.6, which is just crazy slow. Which, despite Brooklyn again posting an elite offensive rating in that game, 127, as they tend to do when KD and Kyrie are both out there, it went under. I mean, Cleveland they have Mobley back. That was his first game back from that ankle turn. Not great. He posted a great defensive rating the next game. I mean, the final game against the Bucks that nobody played. But the point is, he's at least one of the rare specimens that can actually stay in front of Kevin Durant and maybe bother his shot a little bit. I think he's actually more important than Jared Allen in this particular matchup. The Nets are scoring the sixth lowest percentage of their points in the paint since the break. Where they score is the mid-range, of course. They score fast break points. They score off free throws, and Cleveland does a good job eliminating all those things. Also, both these teams are very low scoring in the fourth quarter. Cleveland 27th, Brooklyn 20th. I think it's just really going to grind it out. We always forget, that when we get to the playoffs, these unders just seem to hit really consistently. Yep. Even though the Cavs are not a mainstay playoff team that can grind it out, I think that they will do what they can to slow this game down and try to hang with the Nets, and that makes me think under 229.
Yeah, the thing is about the playoff logic is just that this is the play-in, Nate, and really, I'm being silly, but what I mean by that is there's not that much precedence for the sort of way that teams might change or adapt their play for this one game series, or the fact that this is for one of these teams going to be at least a 2-game series. There's a lot of stuff that we don't really know in terms of how teams kind of come out, what coaches' strategies will be. I'm confident that Jared Allen would be playing if he could be playing. It's not like you're resting guys and saving them for the second game. You'd much rather have that 7th seed, but still, the point is the pace and what it's going to be, I think is a little bit more foretold by what we've seen recently. Definitely the last matchup that these two teams played, which is going to be the exact same lineup. There was 3 games prior to the last game they played, this season, just about a week ago. And those games had James Harden in them. They didn't have Kyrie. They didn't have KD. They had Jared Allen. One of them had Colin Sexton, et cetera, right? There's not that much of a precedence there either, but there is in that last matchup for sure, is something that we look at. And that was a pace of 93. There was a couple quarters that, they were 55-point quarters because one team scoring in the 30s, one team scoring in the 20s. So a bunch of weird lopsided quarters. But one thing definitely held true was Cleveland had a lot more, trouble scoring than specifically Kevin Durant, and definitely, the Nets. But I will say, I think that the trends we're looking for here are KD to carry the team. One thing I wanted to look up too for him was elimination games and how he's played. And I know this is not an elimination game per se because they lose and they still have an opportunity to win beat the loser of the other game. But I still think the winner of the other game. But it's still relevant here in sort of the pressure that he feels. And he's at 13 career elimination games, scoring 30 points a game on 41% from 3. So obviously those nerves don't really hit KD. And as much as Mobley is a very, very plus defender with a very bright future and Defensive Player of the Year awards in his future, I don't think that it matters right now who has a hand in Kevin Durant's face. If you don't block the shot, you're probably not bothering it. He doesn't care at this point where your hand is if it's not touching the ball. Honestly, he's lights out. And, you also look at the other trends I'm looking for, what's been going on with the Nets since Kyrie came back full time. And we know that you start to see Seth Curry back in the lineup consistently. Andre Drummond's been there consistently. And yeah, it's not that there's not that much in terms of the competition that they play to work off of here. They did lose a game against the Bucks by 1 point that took a heroic effort from Giannis and company. It was a really great game either way, and one that I hope we get to see at some point in the playoffs. But other than that, they've beaten some pretty bad teams, but that included the Cavs, and this is just not the same Cavs team as the rest of the season. The only thing that they have consistently is enough defense, I think, to be able to keep this game under. To your point, it's interesting. I told you I like the Nets to potentially get 118 plus or 119 points, that their team total sits at 118.5, because I do think when push comes to shove, they're not going, if the Nets decide that they want to score 30 to 35 points in a quarter, they're going to turn it on and be able to do that. And I don't see them lollygagging through this one the way that they seem to have been lollygagging through their 4 wins in a row that they've got to end the season. And I also wouldn't mind taking the Cavs under or even the total of the game under, indicating that, the Nets get their 119, but the the Cavs don't get their roughly 110.5 that their total sits at as a team. So I'm not actually that scared by the 8.5 points. The Nets found themselves in a place in the last game where they were down double digits, or they were down going into the fourth quarter after giving up a double-digit lead, and getting beat by double digits in the third quarter alone, but then coming back with pretty good defense in the fourth quarter, which I know you mentioned. They've been better at keeping teams down in terms of their opponents scoring. They're not scoring very much in the fourth quarter either. They just slow that pace down because, as you mentioned, it's really just give KD the ball and go get his. As you've seen, even in those last four where he really helped carry them, because Kyrie was not impressive in those last four in most of those games. 32% usage rate in those last four. He's got 31% career usage rate in the playoffs, because that's a lot of what it turns into is mano a mano, give the ball to the best scorer in the world and let him work rather than try to play anything else, and really put the ball in anybody's hands. And the very last thing I'll say and toss to you is Kyrie has not been impressive at home versus the Cavs in his last two as a member of the Nets, including last game where Isaac Okoro, who spent the 8.5 minutes of the time that he was on the floor guarding Kyrie Irving, about 72% of the possessions that Kyrie had was with Isaac Okoro on him, and he kept him to about 40%, which for some shooters might not be bad from the field, but for Kyrie, very, very bad. So also another reason to like probably not as good of a performance as you might think from Kyrie Irving in this one.
Yeah, interesting that you're willing to take the Nets over the Cavs under, but we're not talking Nets to cover 9 points because that just doesn't seem like it's in the cards ever for this team. Because I mean, the way that happens, I think back to that Sixers game a month ago. That was a total playoff atmosphere, and they just took their heart early. And if they can do that to this Cavs team, this young team with absolutely zero playoff experience, other than Kevin Love, I guess. Then I think we could see a blowout for sure. And I don't know what final score will wind up at, but I think the Nets cover. But I think that is a scenario, honestly, that I'm looking at like a 40% likelihood that the Nets just say it's go time. It's playoff time. Like, let's get this over with. We're moving on to the big dance. And the Cavs have been backsliding for weeks now. I mean, I don't know how much they have in terms of being able to put up a fight. So I do like the Cavs under here. I don't really want to mess with how many points the Nets are going to score because I'm scared of that pace. I'm scared of the fact that the Cavs, if they're competitive, can keep it low scoring and potentially cover. But I do like the Cavs under along with the game total under. And yeah, you mentioned Isaac Okoro doing a good job on Kyrie. That does scare me even more about that Nets under, but it also makes just backing Kevin Durant even better, right? Because it's just one or two for those guys. And minus 125 is the odds at FanDuel for Durant to just lead this game in scoring. Or for, 30 plus in a win, it gets you plus 102. But I think it's a little safer to just say KD's going to have the most points here. It's not going to be Garland or Kyrie as they kind of go up against each other. Because, he is the best postseason player out there. And it's go time. You've got his numbers in elimination games here. And while they would have another shot here, it's pretty much an elimination game. You got a 32% usage rate, averaging 30 points per game, 8 points per game at the free throw line. I mean, he's just unstoppable. He had 35, I think, against the Cavs the last time out. Yeah. Much tougher matchup for any team to deal with than Kyrie, as great as Kyrie is.
100%, and he'll be the fourth quarter scorer if this one is at all close. And honestly, I think it's going to have to be a lot close. The disparity will need to be about 20 points in the fourth quarter before they're just going to start sitting players. They're going to want to knock this one out, get the rest, and not mess with any chance of another game. So I think sort of, you worry about the blowout factor. In terms of if you wanted to take, I should have prefaced this with, I kind of like Kevin Durant player performance doubles, by the way. This is where the angle I'm coming from is I do like his 30-point performance double for them to get a win with him to get 30 on FanDuel. That gets you, even money. It's been fluctuating. It was at about plus 108 or so. So, I mean, either way, you're not going to, if you are able to hit it early, I would suggest it because it could go down, especially if that spread moves from the 8.5 that it is right now. If people start hitting the Nets. I think the fact that the Nets won by 11 last game will scare people less from hitting the Nets to get over 8.5 right now, which could cause it to go up to a place where you might consider getting that value back on the under. On the Cavs to cover. But at any rate, still at 8.5. Not too worried about it. Yeah, and like I said, not worried about the blowout factor. It's going to have to be a lot further apart than 15 points with 6 minutes left for them to take Kevin Durant out. In that scenario, he's still finishing that game until they get it to 15 points with a minute and a half left, to be honest, is how I see Steve Nash playing this one. So that's all the time we have for this play-in game. Make sure you are liked and subscribed. We're going to go ahead and talk about the Clippers and the Timberwolves as well, the second of our first night of the play-in tournament. And we'll be back with every single play-in and play-off game with a video for you guys, as well as continuing those player props throughout the postseason. So until we see you next, happy betting.